So the brand new animated Superman show, My Adventures of Superman, is actually pretty good. It's fun, and I think a lot of you will really enjoy it, whether you're a Superman fan, comic book, cartoon fan, anime fan even, or just someone that doesn't really indulge in any of it. This is a great place to start, a great place to learn about Superman. Because before I gush about this story, and kind of the primary reason why I was really interested in it, let me explain my history with Superman. It's not long, it's very short. I know nothing about Superman. That's a lie. I know a little bit, but I'm not an indulger. I'm not a crazy fanatic or fan of comic books or superheroes in general. I appreciate them and can enjoy them, but I'm not someone that knows all too much about it. I've probably seen like 2 episodes of Smallville when I was young and the Henry Cavill movies. So for me, this was a new experience, a place to learn about Superman within a medium that I do appreciate, which is animation. And even though it has slight quote-unquote anime-esque qualities, it's combined and mixed together with a lot of Western cartoons. So it's going to feel right at home for a lot of people, but at the same time, hopefully draw in a larger audience that's a little bit more broader, like myself, for example. In saying that, the reason why I was interested was these 2 images right here. I don't know what it was when it comes to marketing. I don't know if this was purposeful, but it hooked me in. I adore the character designs for this show. This image of Clark right here just resonated with me. I thought it was very peaceful and tranquil. And then this image of Lois, I adore. Such a pretty character design. Her attitude, her characteristics, how she interacts and contrasts with Clark and Jimmy, it just felt really wholesome, really nice. That is it. That's all it took to sell me on this show. And probably a large percentage of you as well. You've probably seen Lois and you're like, wow, that's a beautiful character design. I will watch because of her. What you're thrown into, however, is something a lot more. Something that I'm still kind of exploring and figuring out myself, but I'm very much intrigued to see how they go about throughout the whole season. See, there's only 2 episodes currently. I believe this releases weekly. There's 10 episodes. It's also got renewed for a season 2 already, so that's already in production. And I'm fascinated. I want to learn more about this Clark, about Lois, about Jimmy. I absolutely love their dynamic within this show. At the moment, it's the driving force. It's something that you're paying the most attention to, and they make sure of that. Sprinkled in over the top is the self-worth, identity-driven storyline for Clark Kent, finding out about his powers, seeing bits and pieces of his childhood, where he comes from, who is he, this exploration of his identity and its worth and what it can turn into, and how he wants to mold himself in shape of these abilities. And with only 2 episodes, I think it's done a great job in setting all this very light foundational work to build upon. It doesn't hammer in an origin story. It doesn't try and force feed you massive chunks of information that you can't swallow. If anything, it really just slightly bridges the gap between his childhood, figuring out who he was, as well as where he is now, someone that's a lot older, someone that's, a working class citizen for the Daily Bugle. When you're bridging that connection between his older self and his younger self, you meet in the middle and you have this very engaging contrast of a story and an element that can be explored for however long they want. Now, I understand for comic book fans, this is not brand new. I'm sure the origin of Clark Kent's identity and what that means to him is something that's probably been explored numerous times from so many different perspectives, right? This is just another example of it, but in a way that feels a lot more welcoming, at least for myself, a lot more easier to digest and appreciate because they can spend time building upon it. Now, with this in mind, I was worried because a lot of stories tend to really tunnel vision on this idea of identity. And it can be very overwhelming. It can be very one-directional. And while that story about someone's identity may be really good, everything surrounding it gets blurred out. It gets thrown to the side, usually by accident. I've seen a lot of different approaches from different stories, some that are really good, some that are able to balance it, some that completely disregard the environment and the molding of that said identity, and instead just tunnel vision on one specific thing. So it's obviously up to the author and how they want to do it, but that's where I was worried. I didn't know how Superman or how this show would want to approach the identity of Clark Kent and finding out who he is and finding that worth within himself, because it's a very exploratory subject, because there's so many different pockets that you can actually go into. You could focus on his mental and emotional state. You can focus on the self-destruction of his own worth. Maybe he doesn't feel human. Maybe he doesn't feel like he deserves these powers. Maybe he thinks someone else could do it better. Or you could focus on the hardship tropes of being the only savior within this world, using your powers for good, being in all of these different places at the same time, neglecting certain things because you have to be over there to be a savior. This is just a couple of examples. Tunneling into any one of these would be very entertaining, but so far they're actually reeling out backwards. They want to explore these things by the looks of it, but they also want to balance the comedy. They want to balance the surrounding imagery, the surrounding characters, and make that just as valuable and important to Clark Kent's self-worth and identity. How they do this is with Jimmy and Lois. These are your two staple pillars that is going to pull you in either direction. They provide comedic relief, they provide romance and relationship, they provide friendship, they provide so much for Clark to balance and bounce off. When he's dealing or struggling with this power, with who he is as a person, there's a comfort in coming back to these two characters and watching them interact because he feels normal. He feels like a human being. It kind of grounds him to earth when he's someone that is flying through the sky and trying to save it. This goes a step further in the sense of Lois and their relationship. Obviously, they eventually get together, they're very romantic, but I love the seeds that are planted right at the beginning. Like, they don't waste any time making these two have chemistry straight from the jump, before they even know who each other are. Before you even see Clark being Superman, there's chemistry there, and it works so incredibly well. Especially with the personality that Lois has, which is so intoxicating. It's very easy to love. She pulls so much emphasis and attention towards her that just balances this whole experience, in my opinion, extremely well. So when she's doing her own thing and kind of forcefully dragging Clark and Jimmy alongside her, which is really great, mind you, even though they get in some hot water with some consequences, this allows Clark to feel like a normal person. This allows him to build that chemistry and connection with her. So by the end of episode 2, which is all that's available right now, they've already gone really far within their relationship. They've already sparked up a lot more chemistry that they can play within, and you can see them getting closer and closer and closer to each other so incredibly quickly. Jimmy's a great way to balance the opposite side of this. Someone that is super charismatic, someone that has all of these grand and crazy ideas compared to Lois, who also has crazy ideas but seem a lot more grounded in her approach to doing them. Jimmy just throws him out there. Another point of comedic relief, but a great breather away from Lois and away from everything else that Clark does. If Clark is in the middle, these two keep him steady within different directions. You get a lot from Lois, then you get a lot from Jimmy, and it's just this beautiful balancing act between three characters and how they all come together to form this very beautiful, loving relationship. Now that might sound a little bit weird, but writing wise, viewing experience wise, it just works really well. It's enjoyable. Because these two characters are so strong on their own without Clark, you can have them push together. So you have a lot of times where Lois and Jimmy are doing their own thing and Clark's off doing superhero stuff. So they can hold their own. Superman or Clark can hold his own. They can't really go wrong in that department. I just hope that they continue this forward. I hope they don't leave Jimmy behind. I'm not too sure comic book wise or lore wise how much of an integral part he plays to Clark's journey of self-worth and identity, but I hope they continue to bolster his interaction within the story. So with all of this greatness, what's the issue that I have with it? Because I have a little bit of a problem. It's very early to say this, so it's not the biggest problem. It's not a deal breaker for myself at least, but it could be for a lot of you. The villains so far are very flat. And of course, there is a lot of time to build villains. There's only been 2 episodes. It's not a big deal. I did appreciate the one villain they have in this story, but I can't remember her name. I'm not sure if I just missed it or they didn't really explain all too much about her, but she was kind of fun. She pulled a lot of attention. She had great characteristics about herself that was very commanding and leading. But then another character came in, which I believe is Deathstroke, but before Deathstroke. I could be completely wrong. So far, just a nice little taste or teaser for the opening of the story. It makes me curious on who they want to put a lot of their attention into. Is it going to be this Deathstroke character? Are they going to build them up to be a primary villain or someone that has a lot of attention and writing behind them? Or is it going to be someone else that they introduce? So it's always difficult, I think, when it comes to villains for Superman, because Superman is so incredibly strong. So you need characters that are kind of believable that work against Superman. To be fair, this is still kind of a fresh Superman learning how to fight properly and deal with things. You have these big robots that were introduced. That was kind of interesting too. It feels most believable now within the early stages because Clark's still coming to understand his own powers and how to utilize them properly within combat. I can assume that prior to this, he was just using his abilities to save people, to do pretty standard tasks. But when it comes to actual combat, being cautious of where you're putting all of your energy, your strength, your speed, etc. You can't just fly through buildings and cause mass destruction. So it's learning those ropes, I believe, one step at a time. And she seemed like a good opener for that because she could damage him pretty heavily and it wasn't just a complete one-sided wash. Over time, that's going to change, and I believe rather rapidly. So you really need to figure out who these villains are and how much they can actually compete with someone like Superman. Now, obviously, they could go a different way about it when it comes to Superman's powers. They have this kind of awakening mode that seems to heal all of his abilities. I'm not too sure on the origin of that. I'm sure a lot of you will fill me in. But to me, story-wise, that seems like a way to kind of slightly balance out the odds a little bit. That Superman can be damaged, but then kind of goes within this mode where it's like the most desperate attempt to save or to do something, and it completely just absorbs him into this like Avatar state mode. I like that. The animation that comes with it is really pretty as well. It's a great energy and something that I hope they kind of use sparingly, not all too often. Obviously for those points of desperation, of course, but maybe just for those points. It might make it more impactful and more unknown because as Superman gets stronger and learns how to fight, I'm sure that awakening state mode is going to change rather drastically. It may be completely different and uncontrollable a season from now. If there's anything of value to take from this, someone that doesn't really know anything about Superman or comic books, yada yada, I really enjoyed this. I thought it was fun. I'm very excited to watch the rest of the season. I'm excited to see season 2 in a handful of years whenever that comes out. But I think they have a great opportunity to show off Superman this way, through a different lens or perspective that may not be the most unique or revolutionary, but something that's still very entertaining and enjoyable, alongside Lois, who's a very lovable character, and Jimmy, who I hope they continue to build upon. All of them together is a stunning package of chemistry. That alone, for me, sells this show. And I'd recommend you give it a watch too, if you're a Superman fan or someone that knows nothing about comic books or this character. You'll probably have a good time. With that, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a like, subscribe, comment. It supports me a ton, and I would greatly appreciate it.